In October of 1942, the World War II Battle of Stalingrad was raging, and the Nazis controlled what was then Soviet Ukraine. To escape, 38 Ukrainian Jews descended into a pitch-black cave and remained there isolated for 511 days. Evidence of their forgotten ordeal was found in 1993 by a cave explorer, Nicola.
I was traveling through the second longest of the gypsum caves when I turned the corner and stumbled over some objects. You start to move some earth around, you find medicine bottles, buttons, and a lot of fragments of leather shoes. Those objects were someone's life. I had to find out the story of who lived there.
Nicola joins us now, along with Sonia Dodyk, who was 10 when her family fled into the cave, and filmmaker Janet Tobias, who brings to light this tale of life in the darkness in a new documentary, No Place on Earth. Good morning to all of you. What an incredible story. And Chris, what brought you to this particular cave in the first place?
Well, I was lucky enough in the early 90s to run into a visiting Ukrainian caver in Coney Island, New York. And we became the best of friends, and he invited me back to visit him and his family, and said, if you come back, I'll take you to the well-known giant gypsum caves. Geologists all over the world had known about these caves. Well, he didn't know what it was like to invite a New Yorker back for free room and board, so I've been going back every year since '93. But while going into the cave, I sought to discover buttons, artifacts, stone walls, trenches where people could sit down, and earthen tables. And I realized whoever was there was in there for a long haul. Wow. And there had to be a story behind it.
And how did you figure out who had been in there? It wasn't easy to figure it out.
10 years of research. And by the end of the 1990s, I was actually getting ready to give up my quest. But during my research, I found a very elaborate genealogical website on the internet where people would go and look for records going back to the 1890s in the area. And I realized that every day thousands of Jews would visit that site. So I got this idea. If this rumor or legend was actually true, perhaps one day relatives will be doing research on the internet. And if I put the right keywords embedded in my website on Ukrainian caves, perhaps somebody would find a way to me. And in December 2002, I received an email from a gentleman who identified himself as Ed Vogel, the son-in-law of Saul Wexler, who survived the Holocaust with 37 friends and relatives by living underground for over a year, and Saul was living less than 7 miles away from me.
Wow, what a coincidence. Janet, how did you get involved in this, in making the documentary?
A friend brought it to me, and they initially said this is a Holocaust story, and I said there are a lot of great Holocaust stories. Right. And then I went and I met the Sturmers, and I met Chris, and I thought this is simply the best adventure survival story of any type I've ever heard.
Right.
Sonia, you were only 10 years old when your family went into this cave. What can you remember from that time? Paint a picture for us of what it was like in there.
It was like in the cave. To me, I was mostly in a hiding place. We called it bunkers, but we was hiding. My grandmother said, we're not going to the ghetto. So one day, she told my uncle, go and find a place, because there's no place on earth for us. And when we got into the cave, to me it was a playground, because being in a bunker, you sit in a bunker, you have to be still, you cannot talk. And here I came in and I made believe that I was living in a palace.
And you couldn't even see. I mean, you only had a few minutes of candlelight a day. The men had to go out at night to rummage for food.
But a little girl has a good imagination. And I'd be able to jump around and sing and talk loud, and which I wasn't allowed to do for months in the bunkers. Mm-hmm. So.
But when you came out, ultimately, adjusting the light was difficult, wasn't it?
To my sister.
Yeah.
She said my mother should turn out the light.
It was too bright outside.
She forgot there was such a thing as a sun.
Wow.
She's 5 years younger than myself.
Wow. How many people knew you were in there all that time?
There were a lot of people that knew. They covered us up. They watched us for months, but we had enough provisions for a few months at a time. The men would go out and cut wood in the forest. When there were potatoes in the fields, they would bring in potatoes. And also we had righteous Christians that would help us provide provisions for us.
Janet, in the documentary, you follow some of the survivors who end up going back to the cave. Why was it important for them to go back?
They wanted to say thank you to the cave because in a world turned upside down when the scary place was outside and the comforting place was inside, the cave kept them safe.
Yeah.
So they wanted to go back and say thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, it's an
Wow.
extraordinary story.
It is amazing, and I really appreciate all of you joining us. Nicola, Sonia Dodyk, Janet Tobias, thank you very much for being here
Thank you.
Thank you for having
and
us.
sharing your story.